The funding has just slightly been going down year after year, and the cost of everything is going up. The amount of dollar we get, we can't stretch it as much. I think we just don't fund sport enough in general. I think we like to say that we're proud of the athletes, and I think people at home are proud of the athletes, but as a country, I think if we're really proud, we need to act appropriately and just show it in a meaningful way and not just words.
So that's Laurent Dubreuil, who was on with us earlier in the afternoon. He is a Canadian amateur athlete who won a bronze medal at the Winter Olympics. Beyond talking about that, he published an op-ed, it's in the Globe and Mail, basically lamenting the fact that Canadian amateur athletes are not better supported by their government. And by the way, as a kicker to the story, if you didn't hear it, he's on his way to the World Championships in his event and footing the bill on his own. Also, no coaching for him. Couldn't afford to send a coach along with him. So this is the essence of what's happening right now, and it's happening in a variety of sports, in amateur sports, which is why when these Winter Olympic Games started, or about 4 or 5 days in, when Canada did not won very many medals, people started grumbling, hey, how come we're not doing better? Well, we ended up winning 21 medals, which is fine, but it represents a pretty significant low for Canada. And part of the rationale here is it's about increasing funding. If we want to be competitive, we have to do what other countries are doing around the world. We have to kind of man up on this one, if you will, and put that money out there. And that's something the Canadian Olympic Association is also counting on. We have this is interesting because Eric Myles, who's Chief Sports Officer at the Canadian Olympic Committee, is on the line. Eric, I don't know that you were going to hear what Laurent Dubreuil had to say, but that whole interview that we did painted a pretty grim picture of what amateur athletes in this country have to do or have to go through because of that lack of funding. What message are you trying to send?
Well, it's quite the similar message of Laurent, actually. Listening to him, that's exactly, it paints the reality right now, and that's what we've been trying, actually not just during the Olympic. Actually, yes, we did it at the closing press conference, but it's been more than 2 years. If I look at the COC, we work with Deloitte. We went to get an independent study on this, and and the ask is important, but it's not like out of range in a sense. It's 144 million to come and help to close those gaps. Actually, what we see going on right now in federation, it's either cutting camps or the exact situation of Laurent is what happening right now. So the federation, and right so, they put everything in place to to boost and have the athletes ready at their best for the Olympic. But the budget are so lean right now. There's jobs at risk for coaches, instability, and that's what we see. You end up in competition. I mean, Laurent, Valérie Maltais was the flag bearer. They're all going through a similar situation, and somehow it's unacceptable. And even a report that was supported financially by the government of Canada, Juge Maisonneuve, the preliminary report came out a few months ago. Now the final report will come out in April. But the one main thing that came out of that preliminary report was the urgency of sustainable and structured funding from the government. They did few things over the years, but there was few programs, was year-to-year things, but no increase since 20 years.
Yeah, and that's a part perhaps that people don't necessarily understand. So I'd heard a figure of 1991 that substantially, when you take into account inflation and everything else, we're basically funding these programs the same as we were, as you just said, 20 and 30 years ago. 100%.
And on top of this, there's more sports. There's new federations. So it's the same pie, but the same pie for 20 years. So that's huge step backs. On the other side, and it's important. Like it's not just the government. We need to be at the table also with the private sector. And the Canadian Olympic Committee, we do work. Like 98% of our funding comes from the private sector, from sponsors, donors, and everything. We've been increasing our investment in that same period of 20 years by 300% towards the sports system. But the government sadly didn't follow up. And we see a lot of articles also just on the medal. Like Laurent will get, money for his medal. Like they're getting $20, $15, and $10,000. On top of this, we had a $5,000 through our foundation. But sadly, that first of all, it's not coming from the government. It's coming from the private sector. And second, the athletes will get taxed on this, taxable.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that.
There's few frustrating part like this that we need to review things there within the model and the funding, and that's what we're proposing to the government, and we're ready to discuss so seriously, and there's been discussion, but now it needs clear action.
I will ask, by the way, one of the suggestions you make, at least in the piece that I read, and this makes perfect sense, it's something you're asking for, sports betting, which is become such a huge industry in this country, and making millions and millions of dollars. How far has that discussion gone with the government taking some of that money to fund amateur sports?
Well, it's on the table. It's been presented. It's been 2 years that we're working on this right now, and we see that model in different countries. Often we hear about Norway, different countries like this, and they do work with the lottery. There's still a little challenge with the provinces and responsibility. If we think of Loto Québec, for example, but there's ways. Even there's a tax credit, for example, and so there's different strategy, and we really hope the government they need to get innovative. We're confident in Mr. Carney. The question was asked to me, like, Mr. Carney, he called every gold medalist, and he's a true fan, and he's someone that he believes in sports, and we strongly believe that he's going to come with a solution at the table.
I'm going to run out of time, but I wanted to ask you just one thing that I brought up today. You mentioned how much Canadian athletes get paid for medals. It's not very much compared to what most of the other countries do. I saw the list where they're $250,000 for some countries. But then the other part that kind of struck me was, we're asking our athletes to go ahead and compete. And Laurent Dubreuil, by the way, I'm sure that's not a unique example, where they have to actually shell out money out of their own pockets sometimes to be able to do this?
Yes, that's not to come at the Olympic himself. Like at the Olympic, it's supported, it's paid by us, but it's all the year on the World Cup, and the year prior, and that's what brings you to qualification. So even I was taking our young cross country skier who did fantastic, like finishing fifth in the mixed team. I was there that day, and I mean, that team, congratulations, you make the national team, but it costs them pretty much an average of $40,000 to do their season. So now the entry point is so high, and that's where it's super nervous. Like Laurent explained it really well in his paper. Like, who's going to come in, and how many will come in, and how many will not? Because, the cost, or they will do one cycle, but no way they're going to do 3 cycles like Laurent did, So there's some deep thinking to be doing that be made there.
You'd have to hate to think it's going to be, open to those who can afford to and not really anybody else, because that's the kind of situation you're describing, which would be a terrible situation if that was the case. So
absolutely, and I don't believe that's a Canadian value, and that's the sport system that we want.
I want to ask you one last question, which is, you mentioned Norway. So we know that Norway, of course, ended up with the most medals. Norway's a country of 5.5 million people. How do they manage to pull this off?
Well, there's series. It's hard in a short answer, but first of all, they're really targeted. So let's put it this way. So they don't even bring. There's some people that qualify for the Olympic, for example. They don't even bring them. They bring at the Olympic only people with chance of medals. Number one. Number two, they target really strongly cross-country skiing and biathlon, particularly those two sports. They've got some in long track speed skating, but that's where there's the most medals. So, sometimes, people envy those programs, but we need to analyze that deeply. And at the end, yes, we want to take the best of some other country, but we truly need to build our own country, our own model, and with the reality of Canada. In Norway, I think of Netherlands is similar too. They want to do a meeting and have everyone together. Within an hour and a half, everyone's there. For us in Canada, you do a meeting and you're up for a week, and it costs. So it's not an excuse, but it's a reality. And so we need to build a model that goes into this, and also a model that respects who we are as Canadian and the population and everything, and what is attractive. I think of New Zealand, for example. They did a survey through their population. What are the most meaningful sports for us as a country today? And they did prioritize some of those sports. So, there's a lot of good examples that we can follow like this. And that's what we're proposing to the government, and we're ready to work with them, not just to propose.
Well, I hope it all works out. And I think for many Canadians, hearing this for the first time about how underfunded our athletes are and the fact that it's costing them money just to be able to compete, maybe that's some of the good news they can take to the federal government. And I said the word earlier on, Eric. I said maybe we can shame the federal government into simply stepping up and providing the money that's necessary here. I hope that's the case, because this seems highly unfair to some of the great young athletes in this country. We'll leave it at that. Eric, I thank you so much for the time.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.